Now that you know what boundaries are, we're first going to talk about the verbal and physical boundary violations and best practices, what we can do to kind of avoid them. So, to start with communication and verbal boundaries, some violations include using an unprofessional tone or suggestive remarks. This would be like making a comment about a student's outfit or something that is too revealing. Next would be sharing inappropriate jokes of sexual or of racial nature. So this would be commenting on their race or their sex and maybe using it to make fun of them or to, I guess, you could consider it bring light to a heavy situation, but it might not always be the most appropriate course of action. Discussing sexual matters with students and refusing to stop, such as their own sexuality, or if you are teaching sex ed and you use a student as an example, this would definitely be inappropriate. Withholding academic information to spend more time with a student, that's actually a first form of grooming. Like that's the first step in grooming. So exploiting a student's time in order to have some personal gain and to maybe make yourself feel better and create sort of like an independence from the student to the teacher would definitely be a violation of verbal boundaries. Lastly, sending inappropriate messages or asking intimate questions, both in person or through online platforms, is also a huge violation of verbal boundaries. So some of the best practices or things to think about when connecting yourself with students is to maintain professional language at all times, to avoid intimate topics unrelated to education. I know this one's hard because you want to build a relationship with your students, but make sure just to keep it professional. Lastly, to communicate clearly and respectfully in person and through online platforms. Next, we'll talk about physical boundaries. Some violations include inappropriate eye contact or physical contact with a student. So this would be touching them inappropriately. I don't think it's the best idea to give your student hugs because this can be taken in the wrong context. Physical violence towards a student. This goes, as I said it, you should not hit a student or abuse a student physically. Unwarranted touching with objects. So if you were to use a ruler to scratch another student's back, that would definitely be inappropriate and a violation of physical boundaries. And then finally, presence when a student is changing. So if a student is changing in a change room and you decide to go into the change room to check on your students, that is definitely a violation of physical boundaries. So some of the best practices to avoid violating physical boundaries are to maintain appropriate physical distance from your students, to avoid unnecessary physical contact, to respect their personal space, and just to ensure that interactions occur in visible open spaces. This one is important because oftentimes doors in classrooms don't have windows, so you should just keep the door open. You never know what information can be used against you or what information can be made up or what people are watching. And I mean, you should always treat your students with respect and respect their personal space. And you just want to make sure that you're never going to violate any of these boundaries. So, just to reflect on these two boundary types, verbal boundaries definitely impact the trust and respect in educational relationships, but so do physical boundaries. And in terms of physical boundaries, they definitely ensure physical safety and comfort for all parties. Some repercussions of breaking these two types of boundaries would be loss of trust from members in your school community, potential harm to students and to yourself, damage to professional reputation as an educator, and there would obviously be some legal and disciplinary consequences.